Well, we're very happy to have you. My name's Alexander Magid. I'm one of the fractional CISOs here at Compass IT Compliance, and I'll turn it over to Donny to introduce himself.
Yeah, and I'm Donny Mills. I'm another one of our CISOs here. Been on the team about going on 4 years now, and yeah, we just love kind of sharing our experience. We don't get to spend as much time with every client as we'd like, but the strength that we get is that we get to work with so many different people. Where something like incident response, you might really have a significant incident, hopefully not more than once every year, every couple of years, because we work with so many different customers. We get to guide them through these once or twice a year. Usually we have some sort of significant security incident at one of our customers, and we get to take that experience and share it with all of our other customers on things that went well, didn't go well, and we get to keep on improving this.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think as we'll get underway here, Donnie and myself both have pretty extensive experience in data privacy as well as secure information security and being CISOs. We work with various different companies in all different types of sectors and industries. With our combined experience, we've seen all different types of incident response drills, exercises, real world scenarios play out, working with various stakeholders, identifying new problems, and watching the industry as it's evolved in different technologies and implementation use. So we're very excited to share with you today what we've seen, what we're continuing to see, industry standards of practice. I'll let Donnie explain briefly a little bit about his background, but I come with a background from higher education as well as information security and law, having gone through the legal route prior to coming to cybersecurity. So what we've learned here and pulled together for you today encompasses a lot of that as well. And Donnie, I don't know if you want to talk briefly about your background for everybody.
Sure. Yeah, I started off, I was in the Air Force, and then I went from there into government contracting for IT and security. So about 10 years in that, doing the kind of military and government level security, IT configuration management. And then after that, I went into audits and compliance. So a lot of PCI, ISO 27001, HIPAA, and high trust. Got to see a lot of different programs, probably sure around 100 different companies, did audits and got to see what they were doing, what was working well for them and what wasn't. And then the last about 4 years, I've been at Compass as a virtual CISO.
Fantastic. All right, well, let's go ahead and dive right in. We're excited to get started on this.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I'm sure everyone on this call is aware this is just that high level kick off the conversation. What's the goal? It's to have a documented strategy of what we're going to do when something goes wrong, uh, who's going to be doing what, have all the necessary resources in one place so we don't have to go find it when something is going wrong, and that this is going to be something that's repeatable and evolving, similar to a capability maturity model. We're not all going to be at the same level. An organization, their needs, you have to assess where they're at, where are their risks, and make a strategy that fits that company. I think there's a minimum goal we want somewhere in that like level two, level three, something that's documented, repeatable. We have an incident, we know where it's going to end each time. We're not having to try and figure it out, come up with practices during an incident. We have something to go off of is the kind of minimum standard, I'd say.
Yeah, I agree. I think as we get into these and we start to open it up a little bit more, it's important to understand what a really good, solid incident response plan has. Typically, everybody's varies slightly, but industry standards recommend base minimum should really outline what the purpose and scope of the plan is. Not all plans actually do this very well. But describing if the plan applies to all of your networks, all your systems, all the data managed by your company versus if you have a managed service provider, third parties that are managing the different systems. You should also have listed in there any alternates in the event that key individuals are out sick, they're on vacation, something happens like that. We'll start diving into that here.
Yep, I think that's perfect jumping into what goes into an incident response plan or a program. Because we have the plan, that's the thing that's written down, what we're going to be doing. And then there's the program, all the things that go around it, the training, the preparation, making sure that that piece of paper is what's actually going to happen when something goes wrong. Because I've had companies where they have a great documented plan and then something goes wrong and no one even looks at it. They just take whatever their best idea was. They didn't bring in any stakeholders or team members. They just tried to handle it on their own. So making sure that you actually have a team and they know what they're going to be doing and how to use that plan when something goes wrong.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's really important to understand a couple items in here that we'll dive into. We'll just cover it. Understanding, we've taken a look at different plans that we've seen personally and what's missing in those. The importance of understanding and calling out events versus incidents, understanding the key differentiators there between how it's crucial and understanding that not all events can become incidents. It helps us better understand when reporting to different cyber insurers that additional stakeholders subsequently that the minute you name something an incident, you immediately have to start working through that process. You're now obligated to see it through from identification to closure, taking all appropriate steps of a reasonable individual. I think that's a main component here. Understanding the different preservation of evidence, understanding that the goal of our incident response is to reduce in certain scopes of the incident and ensure that the IT assets are returned to service as quickly as possible, not to hinder business. A couple other ones here, Donny, if you want to jump in on the severity matrix.
Yeah, this is one where, especially as you kind of mature that program, how you respond to it shouldn't be the same. If you have your COO, CEO, all these folks and your legal team are part of your incident management, they can't be brought in every single time something's going wrong. You have to make sure that you have a list of people, and then depending on what's going wrong, the right people get brought in. Because the other piece is you get too many chiefs in one room, and not enough actually moving forward on what needs to happen, the activities. So making sure you have the right team members based on what's going wrong to actually see this plan through. And then I think the one I almost never see done, I'd say, well, is the communication plan of who are we going to talk to internally, externally? How are we going to limit our communication? Are we worried about legal discovery issues? Do we have contractual requirements where we have to be very safe? Are we, as a firm, going to be more open in what we share? Who's that person that makes that decision at the time and ahead of time? How do we prepare templates? Do we have PR firms are going to handle us for this? Do we have it internally? Or even how are we going to talk? If our communication systems are impacted by an incident, do we have backups and alternates and methods of actually doing that communication?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of really good elements here that we have listed for everybody on today's webinar. But some things that I've seen with my background and experience as well, and items that get left out pretty frequently. Cyber insurance and forensics. When you're activating your plan, all insurance carriers recommend that you notify immediately as soon as you've identified an incident and start working through this process. We have seen countless times where teams in different companies and organizations are unfamiliar that they even have cyber insurance. They're unfamiliar with the resources that are available to them through their policies. We recommend in a lot of the plans that we do moving forward for organizations that they outline specifically when to file an incident, when not to contact during a breach, and who they should not be contacting. Information about emergency helplines, expectations of what happens after you notify your carriers. You get very lost in the weeds as there's a lot of different moving parts and things are flying all around. Trying to bring different team members in. Some teams we've seen in the past, because their plans don't include it, are unfamiliar that they even have other third-party stakeholders. They don't know who's managing the different systems. So it's really important to outline all of those and identify where everything is and make sure everybody's familiar. Identifying where the plans can be found, as Donnie had mentioned about, is really important if out of band environments. So for an example here, making sure that everybody on your security incident response team has a copy of the plan, whether it be printed or stored locally on devices. If you have a system compromise and you can't get access to your plan, which happens sometimes, you want to make sure that you can at least get in there to pull it and start running through the steps appropriately.
And yeah, just one I'd like to add on to what Alex was saying there for the cyber insurance and forensics. I had a customer, they had a pretty good sized ransomware incident. And the first thing they did is they went out and they knew they didn't have internal resources to handle the forensics and recovery. So they went and got a forensics company on board immediately. Then they found out about a month later that firm was not part of their cyber insurance plan. So they were out of pocket about $150,000 for that cost they were expecting to be reimbursed because they didn't know ahead of time that their cyber insurance only had a set list of people that would be paid for that forensics activity. All right. And again, so we're all kind of talking the same language here. The phases of incident response, preparation, that's everything we're doing right now. Anything before an incident is happening, make sure we're trained, we're documented, all the resources are available before an incident happens. Into the identification, you get some alert, some notification, and it could be a phone call, an email, or a system kind of alert that something has gone wrong. And then how does the team that handles those alerts, are the right people getting those? Do they know how to escalate? Do they know how to investigate and categorize that incident into containment? So something has actually gone wrong. Let's limit the scope of it. Let's take things offline. Let's try and lock down accounts, whatever we're doing to minimize the impact of the event into eradication. Now that we got things contained, how are we going to make sure that the event is truly over? There's no more malicious actors in our network. Whatever the incident was is truly ended. Into recovery, how do we get back to business as usual, repair any damage that happened, and then get to our lessons learned, take all the information, everything that happened, and try and improve it for next time, call out what we did well, identify our weaknesses so that we can get that preparation done better for the next time there's an incident. And the other thing I'd say is these will go back and forth. Lots of times you get to a point we're contained, we're trying to go and clean up, and we find out the scope changed. We've got to go back to identification. We found some new malicious activity. They were able to cross to a different system. And now we have to go back and forth until we truly close out the incident and get through that lessons learned.
Yeah, and I just want to dive in a step further if I can, Donnie. I think that, this is a really great model to have here, and this is what most people are familiar with. To take it a step further, the preparation phase is really crucial. If you don't have this, then you're going to run into a tremendous amount of problems moving forward. Prepare, prepare, prepare. Building out your incident response plan is paramount. That is the foundation. If you don't have one currently, that's fine, but you need to work on it and you need to identify who the people are going to be, who are your teammates on that security incident response team. Make sure you're documenting the roles and responsibilities accordingly, understanding what the current roles and responsibilities are of team members and making sure they align with what the goals are of your plans. Make sure you're conducting these exercises and drills regularly. Understand your environments and controls that are in place and in scope. We talked about managed third-party services, MSPs. We talked about other third parties that may be handling stacks and servers and various different systems after hours. Understand what their roles are here. Make sure that you're conducting these exercises and drills regularly as you go through and you test your plans and you test your teams. Failure is okay. There are no right answers. We'd rather understand when you go through and you test these processes and plans, we want to know what the failures are so that the malicious actors don't. Understanding the impacts, preparing war rooms, identifying different conference bridges and things like that, it's really crucial. The identification phase, you want to make sure that you're taking steps to perform triage and detection, investigating and documenting your steps. There is no such thing as too much documentation. The insurance carriers and law enforcement will be the first to tell you this. When you finish up and wrap up an incident or they come in, what steps did you take? Can you show us documentation that that was done and completed? We want to be able to see how you worked through the process. So if we need to bring in digital forensics, we can understand where things took a turn or what steps that you took to remediate. It's important to understand your different processes. Make sure that you're determining from a business perspective the severity and urgency of different systems. What data do you have stored? I mean, how are you working through with stakeholders and understanding that we need to get these services restored in a certain period of time because we have contractual obligations. If there's any contracts that specifically call out SLA times that you're required to recover, things like that should all be in your plan and documented. Um, we've heard in our industry time and time again, OFAC sanction lists, understanding who you're working with, making sure that any third parties that you have are not on the OFAC sanction list. You're not working with any banned entities. The containment phase, as we transition into that, understanding that this is the phase that it's okay to start implementing your response playbooks, prevent further damages from problems getting worse, understanding different vulnerabilities that are exploited and what changes are occurring in your environment. Finally, eradication, as Donny was speaking to, these are the steps to help remove all traces of infection and the incidents in your environment. Taking steps to ensure that the incidents cannot reoccur. How are we completely getting it out of the environment and signing off that that has completed and taken place? Understanding and ensuring that any compromised machines are removed, reformatted before placing anything back into service. We don't want to keep reusing infected machines and devices. And then as we transition out into that recovery phase, ensuring that systems are restored from trusted sources, that you have the go-ahead from forensics teams or cyber insurance carriers, and executive leadership is aware of what's going on during this process. And then lastly, that lessons learned is really important. Making sure that you're holding lessons learned continuously, and really after any incidents that you're meeting within 2 weeks following an incident. You're creating an after action report. You're walking through with play-by-plays of the incident. How can we better this in the future is really crucial and it's important. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say the other piece is when we're looking at the plan and we're looking at the preparation phase, when you go through each of these, really pull apart each separate area. Is this a strength or weakness in your organization? Do you have the skills, the tools to do these things? And how do you know ahead of time? We really don't have cyber forensics capabilities in-house to do containment eradication. I couldn't, go through our 1,000 systems and actually tell you which ones it affected, not affected. We just don't have that today. Then your plan needs to ahead of time know that we're going to need outside forensics help to be able to do these activities. And same with identification. Do you have the right alerting and monitoring to even know ahead of time when something is going to go wrong? Or are you going to only learn about an incident when it's already taking you down? So that way you can prepare realistically for what your weaknesses are. You don't want to play into a situation of, oh, we knew the first time someone got a phishing email, they downloaded a link. We knew it instantly. We contained it. We got the malware off of it, and we're good. If that's not the situation you're in, you don't have those capabilities, then you should probably be practicing almost at the recovery phase. If our entire system is down, we've got 300 systems that are at malware screens asking for ransomware, and how are we going to recover from this? Instead of really practicing those early phases where you already know that's a weakness, I would target your actual weaknesses of what's the impact that you're facing as an organization, which is then going to help you get into that phase of getting those resources to get better at the earlier stages.
I have a question, gentlemen, and I want to remind everybody that you can ask questions at any point, and I'll kind of interrupt and get those questions asked. In the lessons learned phase, how can teams balance accountability and learning without creating a culture of blame?
Sure.
That's a
Yeah. I mean,
really,
that's all
yeah,
from
go
the
ahead, Donny.
leadership level, I'd say. That's one I just went through one where, it is you preface that meeting where you sit down, everyone who is part of the incident response process, that CERT team, and there's no attribution. Like we just had one where it was because a unpatched internet facing system had a vulnerability. It was exploited. They got ransomware. They recovered it from the backup. The backup had the same vulnerability, and 2 weeks later, it got compromised again, and they destroyed the backups. So, I mean, there was multiple misses. We didn't really initiate the incident response plan. Technology just took it. restored from a known bad backup, and they had a plan that, oh yeah, we'll upgrade it in a couple of days, without that thought that, well, yeah, someone just attacked this, they're probably going to attack it immediately again. So we had all these misses, and there's no you have to promote that culture of blame, whoever the leader is, to really make sure that we're only focused on how do we improve this thing going forward. And so we identify all those weaknesses, we put owners to those tasks, and then they take responsibility for fixing those pieces. That's, I think, the big part is take that responsibility and move forward.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with that. I think it's really important as Carolyn, I'm looking at the chat here. Carolyn called out it's important not to use the blame game and make sure that you use sentences that do not start with the word you. I love that. That's awesome. It teamwork, right? We're all on the same team. We're fighting the malicious actors, the adversaries. No one here is to blame, but it is important to hold accountable different system team leaders and make sure that their teams under them understand their roles and responsibilities. Having a captain of the ship, so to speak, and making sure that there's one person who is in fact running the show, I think is really crucial in understanding that.
Thank you, gentlemen, and everybody. If you want to ask any more questions, feel free. I do believe we have one more question here.
You guys see that one, Abbas?
Yep.
Yeah.
As much as documentation protects from legal repercussions, what is the legal risk from deep documentation, and how do we mitigate that risk?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So my background from coming from a legal perspective and working with legal all the time, and the insurance carriers, I think this is a really unique area, and it's really a fine line to balance, right? Making sure you don't have too much documentation. It could be seen as a bad thing if it's not held in accordance with what legal counsel's expectations are. Making sure that they understand your process for documentation, working with the insurance carriers prior to ever having a scenario take place to understand what are they looking for? What are data privacy counsel that will be assigned through your insurance carrier? What are they looking for? Making sure that any forms that you have, you've worked through with legal counsel to make sure that they are attorney-client privileged. Anything should it blow up into a massive data breach and there's investigations that take place and follow suit, that any of the conversations that you're having as you work through these scenarios and these incidents are attorney-client privilege, I think is really the best thing.
Yeah, and I will say on this one too, I sat in on a conference with at SACA, one with a lawyer who had gone through some pretty high level incidents with large firms like Walmart, where they had an incident and what allowed them to maintain privilege and confidentiality and what doesn't. Because one point is business documents, regular operations, and data is always discoverable. You can't hide data. So, this malware landed here, this person clicked on this, that you can never hide that from discovery. Uh, the pieces that you can is anything that's a work product for legal counsel. So if they're preparing for a legal defense, then any of the analysis, assessment, uh, or even some of those that we say we don't blame, but the things that went wrong where we didn't do this right. That's an opinion that can be protected, but again, it's all in the handling too. If you go and use that product, so if we do a lessons learned and say, okay, here's all of our problems, we need to go fix them. Now that you're using that for business purpose, it's also discoverable. So it's only something that's prepared for legal arguments is the only way that you can truly protect it. So I would say it's difficult. If you have a high amount of legal risk that an incident could cause lawsuits down the road from either privacy or contractual terms, then that's something you're just going to have to be really careful and work with your counsel ahead of time of what type of data, what type of comments can and can't be in your incident response plan. Another way is to also not be too firm on when we said about categorizing an incident versus event. Uh, that's where you can kind of get into those areas of, you're investigating when is it truly a confirmed finding, and that's where you can have those roles and responsibilities that can kind of protect you of declaring a true event and when you need to start documenting things and retaining evidence. But that is a tricky area. I would say, yeah, absolutely no one size fits all for that. That's something where you really have to look at your risk and liabilities and then how you're going to be managing that.
Perfect. Thank you both for the answer, and thank you for the great question.
All right, I'll jump in on this one. So I love this. I had a mentor a long time ago who shared that it's really important to understand no one likes to be exchanging business cards on the battlefield, and this could not be truer. There have been several examples where I've seen this play out. I mean, what does this mean and what does this look like? So it's really important that you understand who the players are, making sure that this is not the first time that you're meeting each other, going through either a scenario of a tabletop or a real world example. Make sure that at some point or another you've worked with your legal counsel, as Donnie was talking about. Understand that you know the cyber insurance. Understand that you know who your local law enforcement is if it arose to that point. Do you have contacts with local FBI cyber division task force? Do you even know who those contacts are? Um, Understand what they're looking for, all of these stakeholders, uh, prior, during, and after an incident. Where I've seen this play out, the biggest examples is executive management, legal, no one knows who they are, and then find out later that you even had an incident because you didn't disclose it, or there's been a lack of knowledge transfer. They were not properly brought into the conversation. They don't even sit on the security incident response team as a stakeholder. Understanding that the proper people are in play here is really important, and that they understand who's running the show, as I mentioned before, and what they can expect from you. As Donnie talked about, you can have premature, initiation of plans and things, and sometimes understanding the right balance between are we jumping the gun and giving people a false sense of what actually an incident looks like? So we'll talk about that a little bit more. But Donnie, I'm curious to get your perspective on this.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one where I saw a question about from McMahon here in the chat. How important is it to have more than just your security team as part of an incident response tabletop? The security team, I'd say that's the identification. But as soon as you start moving into the containment kind of phases, does security have the authority to direct the business during incident? I mean, if that's okay, if that's your incident response process, but if you have to start turning off networks, if you have to start disabling user accounts, who is the business leader who has that authority to make that decision? And usually it's not security. Security usually isn't the person who's going to tell the business, we're turning you down. Do they understand the impacts? Is the impact of turning this off greater than the impact of the cyber incident that's going on right then? So making sure that you have those roles and responsibilities defined. So it's usually going to be someone from the operational business side of things, your technology team, your cyber, if you have a dedicated cyber team, your legal team. And I also like bringing in someone on the customer service side of things. If this is going to have an impact, it's better that they're not just getting swarmed with phone calls. Is there some proactive way that they can start managing and mitigating the impact down to the reputation level of the company?
Yeah, I agree. And I'm just monitoring the chat here. So I think Carolyn brought up a very interesting point, and this is exactly what we're kind of talking about here. So Carolyn shared that she reached out to her cyber insurance and asked who the firms are that they work with for legal counsel and making sure that they were brought into the conversation. I've seen this more times than I wish to count, honestly. General counsel is so important to bring into the conversations when you're going through these tabletop exercises as just one of many stakeholders at the table. When they've been brought in my experience, they will own the fact that they don't do cyber law or data privacy law, and they will actually be excited about the fact that you've brought in somebody from one of those firms to come in and talk with your team to educate, even counsel on what are things that we should look for and identify, possible considerations, ethical considerations as we go through these different scenarios as they're either playing out in real time or in tabletop exercises. What items should we be careful of not to document, as talked about previously? What should be conversed over chat or in discussion versus written down in email? All those kind of considerations are very important to have. So I'm glad that Carolyn, you asked that question, and I think that's fantastic.
And I will say, and again, this is one where, that is absolutely a right way of doing things or a right way. There's also the other side. I had a company where they had a fairly minor cyber incident, business email compromise. They had a very limited amount of customer information go out through those emails. And so they went to their insurance provider. They got them cyber incident response counsel. Uh, by the end, and they got a forensics company. The end action was, I think, about they had to send notices to 20 some odd people in a few different states, and the bill they racked up was $100,000. That their plan didn't cover that. They had to pay the premiums and deductibles on that. So the risk they mitigated that there was some sort of privacy breach that maybe would go unreported was nowhere near the cost that they end up paying. So that's also knowing again, when do you actually activate this? Do you do it as the first step? And lawyers, they want to mitigate risk, but I think sometimes you have to look at the other side of what's the business risk, the cost associated with that, to make sure that it fits the actual situation that you're in.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. And I think here we get into some of the, what happens if you don't have a well-practiced, well-documented plan. Uh, and I think this first one is, or first two, I would say, roles and responsibilities and leadership are the two that I see that affect, I'd say, everything downstream. If you don't have someone who has the authority, who has the knowledge to lead the incident response process when it happens, then it is going to become an ad hoc process. Everyone's going to be running off doing their own things. You're not going to have control of the information. You're going to have undocumented responses happening. Uh, and people aren't going to know if they should or can make decisions during an incident. They're going to be waiting for someone to tell them what to do. So I'd say the first thing to solve is who, and sometimes at what level, who can make what decisions at what level in the business during a cyber incident, so that this can move quick. The more time it takes, the more damages are happening, and the impact to the business is just going to keep growing.
Yeah, one of the items that I'll kind of build off of that a little bit here and is towards the bottom we had talked about previously is premature initiation of the plan. So this is really a critical factor. Are we jumping the gun and just giving people a false sense of what actually an incident looks like if one, they've never been exposed to one before, and two, what we've defined internally in the organization as an incident as it pertains to our business, the data we hold, the customers that we have and what they expect. It's really important to make sure that this isn't happening. So making sure that you prepare, take the time to educate your teams and your staff, work with your third-party vendors, understand what their responses look like if you have any critical systems that are held up in their environment. This is an important practice. Alert fatigue is a real thing. If you're getting alerts consistently and you're thinking that everything is event or an incident, then there's a problem there. Something's broken in the process. If all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail, right? So making sure that you've gone through this process and understand that everybody's on the same page. And as Donnie had talked about as well, good leadership. I think it starts from the top and works its way down. Comfort levels, best practices, making sure everybody's on board. Not only are they aware, but that they support the path moving forward that the organization has settled on.
And I think what you just mentioned about, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Carolyn had a great point about when do you separate between a detection, an event, and an incident? So, and I think this is what goes to that categorization of in your incident response plan, where you can categorize something as a very low level incident, and maybe the response and even the lessons learned, it's still there, but it's not as, a full blown exercise where you're bringing in 20 people. Uh, but if you had a person who got phished, we got a compromised credential and then it got used, but the MFA was secure. So really you just got to hit the password was reused somewhere. And so your response is probably reset that person's password, give them some training, and then evaluate your controls. Are controls still sufficient to handle this threat of a phishing-based credential compromise? They seem to work that time. And so, maybe you build up more over time. If this keeps happening over and over, then maybe your training's not good enough. Maybe your email protection's not good enough. But yeah, I'd say really just do that little bit of a lessons learned each time you get those to evaluate your controls.
Definitely. Okay.
Right. And now we're into testing. So I'd say this is the end of the kind of planning cycle. So we have got everything documented, we're up to date. The team has been trained, everyone knows what their responsibilities are during the test or during the incident, and now we're going to test it. Uh, we have 60 or 90 minutes. And sometimes I've seen people do half day exercises, but I think at some point when you have enough people in a room for too long, people are going to start wandering. They're going to have up their screens. They're going to be doing other things. It's pretty hard to truly block off enough senior people for half a day. So I'd rather do things more frequently, find those blocks in a schedule, and start training specific skills during incident response, doing those 60 or 90s. And then I'd say the part that I like doing the most during incident response test is that stress testing. Uh, Things are not going to go how you want them to. You're not going to have all the people there when they need to be there. Systems are not going to be working as you want them. And so having to make reactions with incomplete information, your prompt shouldn't be, oh yeah, here's exactly what happened. You already know ahead of time. You have 20 systems. These are the ones. What are you going to do about it? You're going to probably have a small set. You're going to work on it. You're going to get more information and really go that back and forth testing that you're able to respond to new information and come up with new plans based on that.
Yeah, definitely. If I can go back for a minute, I think it's important to understand. So the 60, 90 minutes, as Donnie mentioned, it really depends on your organization. It depends on your group of members on your team, familiarity, comfort levels, in some instances, attention spans. But it's really crucial to know your audience, know what your willingnesses are, know how much your time that you're willing to devote to this. What experience does everyone bring to the team? Some are larger groups with more stakeholders, therefore it's going to take longer. They have more complex systems and tests to run through. Some are required through regulatory requirements and legal obligations or contracts that require you to test various different systems on a more frequent basis, or working with third parties to actually run through the systems together. Some of these exercises require in the 90 minutes that you refamiliarize your CERT team, your incident response team members to the plans, or perhaps it's your first time and you're introducing them to a brand new plan and this is your first tabletop. Set those expectations, identify alternate members, as Donnie talked about. Um, Understand what the organizational expectations are. Are you expected to restore services immediately? Are you expected within 24 to 48 hours? What does that look like? Do you have to call a managed service provider, an MSP? Who are the different alternates? And then the stress testing piece. I love what you had said there, Donnie. I think it was really great. I love to use that whole mindset of it's 5 p.m. on a Friday and someone broke the golden rule and just pushed a software update that was bad, right? As zero-day exploits. What do those look like? How are we testing that out? It can be any time of day, it can be any situation. It's Tuesday at 2:20 in the morning and Sue from engineering's out, and we're not receiving alerts from our SIEM, or we have a SIEM, but it just provides alerts and doesn't take action. Things never go according to plan. So it's really crucial to stress test your environment over and over and over again, and break it up. Have fun with it too.
Yep. And as I saw Tammy's comment here about having the executive group join and be involved, that is great. One of the, I'd say, benefits of, from a security, we're always trying to get that prioritization, get that, this is the true need of the organization, get that story out there so that we can have resources, so that we can mitigate risk effectively. And I think this is a great way of doing it. If you come up with a good scenario that calls out your weaknesses in a fair way, we don't want to just invent something that goes wrong. We're not really expecting that. But if you know your organization is weak and they're I don't know, their identity and access or their vulnerability management, and you come up with a scenario where we know we haven't applied a patch in 6 months. Well, guess what? Your attack just exploited that vulnerability, and your executives probably don't know that, we're running on 6-month-old software. That's not something that's going to bubble up probably to most of them. So it can get that story out there of, here's a real world consequence of where we're at right now, and try and get that, even, that lessons learned off of an instant response test, treat that as a real lessons learned of, are we okay with accepting the risk that this could happen? That's not our decision, but we can document it and make sure that the right people get that information.
I have another question for you, gentlemen.
Mhm.
How do you address clients who conduct the same incident response plan test each year and claim it also covers their BCP testing for the year? How do you emphasize the importance of diversifying testing approaches annually and demonstrate that each test brings unique value?
So I'd love to take a stab at that first, and then Donnie, I'm killing to get your opinion here. So I think testing different scenarios is really useful. I mean, everybody's go-to is ransomware because it's the most common. 99% of the time it's ransomware, unless you're that unlucky 1% who's faced with something other than, right? Exposing your team to the varying scenarios, it provides familiarity and comfort level. It comes back to the discussion that we had about exchanging cards on the battlefield, making sure that your teams not only are familiar with all the different stakeholders, but every scenario is going to require something different. Every scenario is going to test a different aspect of your environment. It's going to point out gaps in your system. It's going to point out gaps that exist, even if they're not necessarily tied to computer systems. I've worked with organizations where they had data centers, and God forbid we would test, what if the generator went down, right? Like we didn't have any backups and it's not tied specifically to the computer system, but the entire organization. Well, now the data center is down or the closet's down or we can't access any of that. Do any of the individuals that work with you, if you're a remote environment, do they work in a very rural setting? That's important to understand as you go through and test these as well. Different types of scenarios require different things and different specialized skill sets from different people. So that's kind of my take. And as far as combining the two, Donnie, I'd love to get your input there.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say I haven't been guilty of this before, especially, there's some compliance goal. We have to get a test before an audit. Sure, sometimes this is what happens. You have to brush off your ransomware PowerPoint and you run through it. But really, if you're trying to deliver that value of, what are we trying to do? We're trying to reduce the risk that an incident is going to happen and that the organization is going to have uh, greater impacts than if they did have a good, well-tested incident response and business continuity plan. I do like combining it when that's feasible, when it's realistic, and it makes sense. That there is an incident and then it causes an outage that then hits the level of a business continuity event. If it is something like, 5 computers got some ransomware, I don't see that hitting a business continuity event. And so we could, again, that's almost just a paperwork drill. If we're really trying to say that we're going to be using business continuity practices for that, probably not. But if you had a well-designed event where we went through a large outage, it impacted our delivery of services to half our customer base for a week, that's probably a business continuity event. But is one person going to be running that? I guess that's also another difficulty of, can you be managing doing that test and getting those activities from both teams? The business continuity team is going to usually be a little bit different than your cyber incident response team. So making sure that there's enough, you're not cross-talking and you're not just taking time siloing these conversations. That's, I'd say, the difficult part about running those at the same time. So maybe what you could do is the incident response test, kind of document, here's all the things. It would take us 2 weeks to recover from this. And then, we had this amount of data that was breached as part of the incident response. And then you separately could hold a business continuity test right after that with the business continuity team and give them this as a scenario. Okay, we had this incident happen. Our systems are down. We don't believe they're going to be up for a few weeks, and there's possible data exposure. And how is the business going to respond to that to limit the impact there?
I had one more question come in as well. Let's say a mistake is made and nothing goes bad, but it could have. We usually use this as an opportunity to understand how bad things could have gone and what we could have done if, or rather when they did. Is this a good substitute or complement to IRP exercises? How can this process be improved?
Yeah, I'd say that's good lessons learned activity. I think what we were talking about earlier, if we got some detection, someone clicked on a link, they downloaded something they should have. Uh, we're not at the level of a true incident. We have the detection, it was contained immediately, there was no impact, is I think the big differentiation there. Uh, then I'd say that's a great compliment where you're doing those lessons learned, you're recording it as an event, and you're addressing, was your control good enough? Do we have more risk than we're willing to accept right now for this? And then just keep that as a record where you can start building up that knowledge over time, making sure that how you responded to it is how you wanted to respond to it in the future. It was your just even that section, and not necessarily how well that plan was working. I think that's a great way to sub or to complement the instant response exercise.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. And I think this is where it ties in towards the end about having an after action report and going through the lessons learned, making sure that you're tracking progress. Have you identified things? Have you failed properly, right? We want to fail. We want to be able to identify these things. We don't want to fail necessarily in a real world scenario. We want to make sure that we're comfortable in reaching out to people when we need help, but we want to make sure as we go through the IRP and tabletop exercises that we're failing then so that we don't fail in real world scenarios. There's a lot you can learn from these different things, and there's tremendous amount of value here. So I think what Donny had talked about is spot on.
Right. And then this one, uh, this is how I like crafting my scenarios. I would say I go look at what's happening in the news and then use this to craft it to whichever organization. We want to make it realistic. Don't make up a scenario that really could never happen to them. They have the right backup recovery capabilities. They have their offline backup. So they could restore a whole system. Their entire environment is containerized with a CI/CD. They could redeploy it in a minute. And, the test would be that they would say, "Oh, we had a compromise. We redeploy everything. We reset all accounts," and that's how they would address it because they already have a well-practiced plan around that. So start looking at where are the organization's weaknesses. Do they have third-party tools out there where they're dependent on someone letting them know they have a vulnerability and then applying a patch? Do they have a good process to apply that? It's something like the move it vulnerability that could compromise us. The supply chain, do you have development practice in-house where they're using third-party repositories off Git? They've seen cyber criminals go and add malicious code to known good packages, and then you go and update your package. You've added that malicious code into your software now. Any of these kind of vendor compromises you're looking at, do you have a good practice around how you would handle that? And then just some other ideas, insider threat. I mean, that's one you're never going to have great controls around. At some level, you have to trust your employees, but do you have a good practice of what you would do if that happened? And do you have the right level of visibility and controls to be able to mitigate that threat? Bring your own device. I've had so many customers where they have all these controls and anti-malware and protections, and then they let someone's phone connect to their network, and all those go out the window because you have an unmanaged device with sensitive information on it. Anything else there, Alex, for types of scenarios you like?
Yeah, I really love the insider threat one. I love the supply chain compromise. Those two are my personal favorites, right? They're the go-tos that I love just because we are working with our vendors all the time. I think understanding the partnerships that we have, both from a business relationship and personal, if you've been working with the same vendor for years, what does it look like? It was a business disruption to you. Is it if they have a compromise, or is it something that slows down your business internally? Are you worried about your systems and processes as it relates to them, or the fact that you can't access the data in their environments, period? Those are kind of my go-tos. And then I love the BYOD is a very challenging thing to work through. I don't know a single organization who is 100% gotten their hands around that one because it's continuously challenging. So it's a fun one to test, and I think Donnie really hit the nail on the head there. And I just love these scenarios; they're really great ones.
All right, I think this is our last slide before we open up to questions. Alex, I think you're a pretty big fan and love talking about lessons learned. Do you want to take the first stab at this one?
Yeah, so I'm happy to. So it's really really important that when you go through the lessons learned section, right? You're identifying your areas of success. You're identifying the areas of failures. You're incorporating risk management. When you get to the after action report, this is the spot where you can really shine, right? You want to demonstrate what didn't go so well, what also worked. You're telling a story. Your reader has no context. Some regulations and different businesses have made it a priority to make sure that executive leadership teams, the board has access to review some of these things after you've gone through either a tested scenario or a real world scenario or a real event. They want to know what happened, why did it happen, when did it happen, what resources don't we have, what can we do to better prepare you, how can we prevent this to happen in the future or minimize the impact at best. It's important to understand that you need to make sure that you're in your after action report providing introductions, right? Why are we here today? Why was an exercise conducted on Monday? What was the purpose of that? What's the background? Um, why did we decide to test this particular scenario versus the standard ransomware scenario? Why did we branch out and diversify? Understanding the scenario context. Why did we test on a Tuesday morning at 2:20 in the morning as a scenario? Well, we wanted to see who's going to respond. What alert systems do we have in place? What are the protocols that we have when it's holidays and people are gone and no one's here? Who's monitoring those things? What were the objectives? Did we know that we had weaknesses that we wanted to continue to test? Did we identify new weaknesses and we wanted to build off of those? Having the agendas listed with the time showing how long each segment of your exercise took. How long did you spend on introducing your team to the incident response plan? Did you have new members who you had to welcome into the CERT team? Was this the first time that marketing and communications had joined and they wanted to know what the process is for alerting customers or any third parties or external stakeholders? And then highlighting those findings, making sure that both general findings as well as specific findings, I think is really crucial here. And then the last piece that I wanted to dive into, I think it's important that you understand if there were any communication issues. This comes up as something I see quite often, actually, in a lot of these after action reports. Making sure that you've documented, did you have communication issues with staff? We had talked previously about restoration of services. Do you have a generator? Do you have backups? Do you know that your ISP is reliable? Things like that. Health and safety issues. Those are considerations, right? We didn't talk much about that. Security is more than the systems, and it's important that you capture this not only in your plans, but in your actual scenarios as they play out. It's also important to understand, as I talked about, members of your teams, we live in a very remote society now. Are the people who you've employed with the tasks to handle these situations and scenarios, are they living in an area that might be rural with unreliable internet connections? Do they have redundant backups themselves? Note everything. I think this is a great opportunity and make sure that you provide recommendations moving forward. There's really no right or wrong answer.
Yeah, I think that's all great. And for me, I'm a pretty big fan of coming up with a realistic and actionable risk management program. There's risk management where we're throwing everything out there and it becomes a lot of noise, but really identifying when is something become a risk. This is no longer just a finding, this is an issue. When is it something that we need to address as a company where the uh, the impact outweighs the cost of fixing it, whether that's a tool, additional people, whatever we need, making sure that we've called out, we think, we're making that recommendation. We ran this test, we identified we had a weakness. We believe that this weakness is going to lead us to be more exposed in the future. And so we recommend that we take this action for it. And so I think that's a great place for all these findings to live. Because the other thing is, we prepared a report. It's now a Word document, a PDF, whatever. How are we actually going to turn this into a business document? And I think the risk register is a great place for findings, or your project management, for these to go up after management's gonna be the one that makes that decision to accept that and move forward.
Yeah, definitely. Continue to build, right? You want to make sure that you're having a really great relationship with everybody involved. It's important to understand roles and responsibilities, build on this process, and there are no wrong answers, right? We're all in this together, and we're all trying to help each other in the times that we live. So it's important to understand all these different roles that play into this, all the different varying factors. And last of all, I think it's really key to have fun with it. I see all the time where some teams are so stringent that they don't really get into it, and people don't open up about, well, we don't really have that capability, or well, we don't really know who's going to be doing that if I'm out on vacation, or all these different types of scenarios. Make sure that you're doing it frequently and having fun with your teams. They will be much more willing to open up and let you know what they don't have and what they need.